Welcome to the next episode of Elevate Presents. This is where we feature the people, books, and events that we think our listeners and viewers want to hear from. We're very excited today to have Baltimore City mayoral candidate Mary Miller, who recent polling has shown as one of the front runners. So definitely someone that we wanted to bring to all of you. And also remind you that we have upcoming shows, Westmore on the 19th. Very excited about that. On the 21st, we have former director of the White House Domestic Policy Council under President Obama, Cecilia Munoz. And then also after that, and Candace, I don't know if you want to pump this up, but we're moderating. Are we allowed to say this now?
We are allowed to say it now.
Okay, cool. We're moderating for the Howard County for Joe Biden team a party. I guess it's going to be a group chat party Zoom thing. We're going to have Congressman Kwesi Mfume, State Senator Guy Gazzoni, and the Maryland Democratic Party Chair Yvette Lewis, plus DJ Fella. I do not know who that is, but I'm excited to find out.
He's a famous Howard County DJ. We kind of grew up with him. We should thank Herb Smith for connecting us and Sean Ford so that we could host that. It's going to be fun and interactive, and it'll be good.
I'm pretty excited about it. I mean, it kind of came into our life, and that's going to be a long day of Elevate. A lot of Elevate that day. And then on the 22nd, super excited. My law school classmate, who is so much more successful than I am, Zubin Parang, former head writer of The Daily Show, now producer of The Daily Show. So he's gonna be on the show. We got him booked. We had to work through. I had to work through. You had to work through the Comedy Central legal team to say why he should come on the show. So it's like a huge week for us. And by the way, I'm reading Westmore's book to try to be ready for Tuesday.
I love it. Yeah, we're really excited. And for that last show, the one on the 22nd with Zubin Parang, it is actually going to be broadcast nationally through Podcast Garage. Oh, yeah. And so in addition to being on our Facebook page as a live show, it will be also broadcast on their page. And that will reach many more folks. Well, it will reach some more folks. So, and with that, I'd like to officially welcome our guest to the show. Mayoral candidate Mary Miller has joined us. She's a Democrat running for mayor of Baltimore, her home of 34 years. Her career has been spent studying urban planning and investing in cities. In 2009, President Obama appointed Mary to help lead our country's recovery from the Great Recession. As the first woman to serve as the Undersecretary for Domestic Finance at the U.S. Treasury Department, Mary oversaw the U.S. economy. Mary left the Obama administration determined to help strengthen her hometown, and has been working to get money flowing into neighborhoods in Baltimore, help women and people of color start small businesses, and revitalize historically neglected areas of the city. Welcome to the show, Mary. We're glad to have you on.
Thank you. You've certainly got a star-studded cast of visitors for the next week. It's impressive.
Yes, it is. It's great, and we have great partners on the podcast who have helped introduce us to folks, and we're really thankful for that. So we're going to jump right in. There are several candidates in the race for the mayor of Baltimore City. Tell us why you decided to run and what makes you the best candidate for the job.
I think there's a total of maybe 23 or 24 people who've registered for this race. I, as you mentioned, am a longtime resident of Baltimore. I've lived and worked here for 34 years. And I have to say, I think Baltimore is a city with tremendous potential, but we're simply not living up to it right now. I think to be a great city, we've got to do a much better job of educating our children, providing good jobs and opportunities for everyone in this city. We need to have a sense of public safety. We need to restore people's sense of personal security in the city. And we need to just get back on a growth track for Baltimore. And I looked at every candidate in the race, and I did not see someone who had my background in public policy, in the private sector, and in the public sector, serving at the national government level, working with cities across the country on economic recovery. I spent 26 years working at T. Rowe Price in Baltimore. I started out as a municipal bond analyst studying Baltimore's finances. I ended up running the Maryland Bond Fund for 10 years, which invests all over the state of Maryland in capital projects, but gave me really deep insight into Baltimore City finances, which I've been following for decades. And I think right now, given the coronavirus and the situation that we're in, the public health issues and the economic issues, I think the next mayor is going to face a very daunting challenge of bringing back this city to economic recovery, but also growth. And I just think I have the right mix of skills for what we need right now. But bottom line, I love Baltimore. The city is not living up to its potential, and we need a totally different change of direction and leadership.
So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the things that we talked with some of the other mayoral candidates about is the violence that pre-existed COVID, and unfortunately, oftentimes is the top line subject when people talk about Baltimore. But we know, as we've talked about with our guests, that there are systemic problems at play, that violence is a symptom of more than it is a problem in itself. So I was curious, what do you see as a holistic approach to Baltimore City in terms of education and jobs, and then also, if you want to talk about the crime element as well, how do you see them interrelated, and how do you plan to address them?
Mm-hmm. I think they're all related. I think they're highly connected. I've said about crime, I think I'm the only candidate that is strongly out there saying, I want to get behind our police commissioner and give him the resources and support he needs to succeed in reducing crime in Baltimore. We have had 5 police commissioners in 5 years. And that level of turnover, I think, has been highly dysfunctional in making any progress in reducing crime in Baltimore. We have a good police commissioner. He reduced crime in New Orleans. He settled a consent decree in New Orleans, which we have in Baltimore. And I think he has the experience. He has not had the support from elected leaders to succeed in his job. So that is the first step that I would take. The second important thing here is we need to restore trust between the community and the police department. We have had a terrible history of biased policing, unconstitutional policing, of steps and things that have happened that have made it impossible for many citizens in Baltimore to trust the police. The way to attack that is to resolve the consent decree, which is really the menu. It shows you all the things you need to do to put in place a much stronger police presence in communities that is going to be treated as a partnership as opposed to something that is untrusted. So I want to help Commissioner Harrison resolve the consent decree. And I think I have the management background to help them with the human capital issues, with the training of police officers, with the sort of investments you make to change the culture of an organization. But I also say that we don't just have a crime problem in Baltimore, we have an opportunity problem, because we have not made the investments in public education, in workforce training, in creating safe housing and creating opportunities for people, that we have left this city in just a terrible state. We have nearly a quarter of our population living below the poverty line with no measurable change over decades. And it is time to attack that, because unless we can give people good opportunities in Baltimore, they're going to turn to a life of crime because they're desperate. So I feel very strongly that we need to be making the investments in the police department that we need to make to reduce crime, but we also need to be investing in the people and neighborhoods in Baltimore so that we're giving them opportunities.
You mentioned education when we asked your question about why you're running, and we know that the Build to Learn Act, which would have increased public school funding in Baltimore City, was vetoed by the governor. We're also in the middle of a crisis, and I think it continues to highlight the inequities in our city, but frankly everywhere, in public education. And so what are your plans for addressing education-related issues?
Sure. So I'm a very strong supporter of both the Kirwan Plan, the commission that made these important recommendations to strengthen public education, but also the investments we need to make in the facilities, the infrastructure of our school system, because we have some very poor facilities in Baltimore. What I would say about all this is I disagree with the governor's decision to veto. I think we have a very strong legislative delegation in Annapolis from Baltimore, and I hope they will fight to override that veto and get the Kirwan Commission spending started. Now, there are some provisions in the spending to lower spending if you're in a period of economic distress, and I know we are. But I think if we do that, I think we should pick the elements of that plan that we can begin to fund, and I will find the funding in our budget to do that. I think public education is a moral obligation of a city, and I don't think we should be backing away from Kerwin right now, because that sort of disinvestment you pay for decades. So let's pick out the things that are most important. I, for example, am very interested in the early childhood education and getting 3-year-olds into school. If they're in school, that gives their parents a chance to work. That's a good thing for everyone involved. I also want to put more into career and technical education for high school students to keep them in school and keep them there to be trained for a job. I know we can do a better job with this. So the Kerwin Commission recommendations included about $46 million in additional spending in fiscal 2022, rising to $170 million by 2030 for the city of Baltimore. That's the city's share of this. There is some bridge funding in place for the next fiscal year to 2021. Let's use that to start making these investments, and let's grow into that budget as we can. But if it involves making hard choices in the budget, I would vote for education. The city has only been spending about 13 to 14% of its operating budget on public education. Most of it is funded by the state. I think we could make a bigger commitment here in Baltimore.
So as I mentioned to kick off the show, you've sort of found yourself in front runner status recently, as recent polling has shown you as one of the top 2, top 3. And I think that's been somewhat consistent over the last couple of months. But obviously with that comes some criticism. And one thing that your opponents seem to be bringing up often is that evidently you made a campaign contribution to Senator Mitch McConnell, back in 2006. I wanted to, you're running in the Democratic primary. Baltimore is a deep blue district. There's really not much purple, I would say. What do you say to that? How would you explain this contribution to those voters? And is this an evolution that you've had politically, or was it just something about McConnell at that time that you supported?
Yeah. I made that contribution in 2006, so it was a long time ago. Mitch McConnell certainly did not occupy the position of power that he holds today. I do not like or respect him today, would never make that sort of contribution, and I think it pales in comparison to my support for Democratic candidates over the years. So all I can say is I regret it, wouldn't do it today. You know, it was a long time ago, and it does not reflect my thinking about Democratic politics or politicians today, and I certainly would not do that today.
And was there something about him then that you supported?
To be honest with you, it was so long ago, I believe it was related to work he was doing on legislation that was something I supported. But honestly, I have no memory of it, so it came up when we were doing, you know, a review of all political contributions. And again, I certainly regret it, and I certainly would not make that contribution today. He does not reflect any of the values that I espouse.
So given some of the recent challenges in Baltimore and frankly the state related to elected officials who have been convicted or accused of crimes related to unethical behavior, what will you do to ensure trust and accountability in your administration?
Well, I think a number of things. I don't think we have strong enough ethics and financial disclosure rules for elected officials in the city of Baltimore. Right now, for example, there is an ethics board. It is appointed by the top elected officials in city government. The same people who appoint the board would be the people the board might be investigating. That's not sufficient independence. So I would change the way people are appointed to the ethics board. I would also fund the board. They don't have any budget, so they don't really have any resources to do a good job. I think that's very problematic. I think ethics should be top of list for Baltimore. We have a very unfortunate history here, and I think that we need to send a strong message that that's not how we're going to operate going forward. I would ask for more financial disclosure from elected leaders, particularly about business relationships. Personally, I don't think any mayor should have any outside business dealings while in office, and should certainly not be collecting a pension while in office. As I've said, as mayor, I would not accept a salary as mayor, and I wouldn't accept a pension as mayor. This is my personal commitment to Baltimore to help this city get back on its feet.
In addition to the programs such as education and public safety, there's also ongoing discussions about infrastructure in Baltimore City. You know, the governor Uh, Canceling the red line, I think we've talked about that every time we talk about Baltimore. In addition to the red line, are there other infrastructure projects that you would want to pursue as mayor to help the city's bones while you're building on its muscle, its programs and education?
Sure. I'd love to see the federal government do something on an infrastructure program right now if they're thinking about further assistance to state and local governments, because I think there's a lot of investment that Baltimore can make in the city. But probably the biggest one that jumps off the page to me is the number of vacant houses in Baltimore. That figure has been stuck between 16 and 17,000 now for a decade. So every year we might take a few off the rolls, but we put a few back on, and so it's been pretty static. I would like to mount a major program for the city to sell vacant houses back into the private sector, find the financial support to renovate those houses and put them back on the city's tax rolls. That is a project that could employ small developers in Baltimore, local citizens who need work, and could be part of a broader, what I call Baltimore Works program, to engage our youth. We have 16 to 24-year-olds whose unemployment rate is 4 times the national average. That's getting back to this opportunity problem. And I think the city can give them the opportunity to work on environmental and infrastructure projects in the city. And the way to fund that is to sell the vacant houses. So let's mount a major program to move these houses off the city's rolls, where frankly, they're costing the city a lot every year in lost property tax revenues, and also the cost of boarding up, attending to fires, services around these blighted properties. I think there's a huge opportunity to look at 2 great assets in Baltimore: our people who deserve to work and our property. Some of these houses are beautiful architecture, they're blighted, they're decayed. With investment, they can come back and make Baltimore a very attractive city. So I would use this opportunity, this time, particularly if there's federal aid that's going to support state and local governments, to invest in the city. One of my favorite projects in Baltimore is the tree canopy project, to plant trees in Baltimore, which have a number of benefits. You reduce temperature differential across neighborhoods when you have more trees. That's good for public health. You improve the air quality because trees can absorb particulate matter from the air. And you also improve the aesthetics of neighborhoods. But you can also give people jobs by planting trees across the city. In the proposed budget for 2021, I saw about $4.5 million devoted to the Baltimore Forestry Project. I'd do more than that. I think this is a real chance to do a lot more.
And Candace, if I can ask a follow-up on that.
Sure.
You've brought up a couple times federal funding, and I sort of have a 2-part question there. One is, do you think Baltimore is getting the support it should from the federal government? And if not, do you think that you would be better positioned because of your past experience to be able to get federal investment?
Yeah. I do not think at this moment the city is taking enough advantage of the federal assistance that I believe is on the table. The CARES Act that was passed at the end of March, the $2.2 trillion package, included, I think for Baltimore, $103 million for COVID-related expenses. And I believe the city is going to apply for those. But we haven't heard much about their activity on that front. There's also money, for example, in the CARES Act to help urban transit systems. And this gets back to your prior question. Our public transit system in Baltimore is run by the state, by the MTA. I don't think that we have focused enough on the poor public transit issues in Baltimore, and we should go after the CARES Act money for public transit systems. For example, there are dollars there that could be used to create a public transit fare holiday. And I think the city should work with the state to say, let's put that in place for the rest of 2020. We already know that transit usage is way down. We're not collecting much in fares anyway. Let's use this as the opportunity to give something to our citizens who have such a hard time getting around our city, and where fares may be a barrier to mobility in Baltimore. That's a way we could respond in the moment to something that I think is a big need in Baltimore, because as we reopen the economy, essential workers and others are going to need to get to work. And I think that we could give them a break here. But that's federal aid. There's also a program the Federal Reserve has introduced called the Municipal Liquidity Facility, which is a 3-year low-interest loan to help cities bridge through a period of reduced tax revenues because the economy has been hit so hard. I think Baltimore should be using that as opposed to making furloughs and laying people off into an already very weak job market. So to answer your question, yes, I think we should be very aggressively going after the federal aid that's available for cities and making sure that Baltimore is using that aid to the fullest, but also wisely, and making the sort of investments that can get us through this period and bridge, the divide that we have right now.
We asked this question of Sheila Dixon when she was on, and we'd like to ask you the question as well. Baltimore has sort of a reputation that has been exacerbated by the media, right? In some cases, and I'm not bashing the media by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously the Freddie Gray related situations made national news and sort of painted Baltimore in a certain lens, with a certain lens. And so our question is, we think Baltimore needs sort of a PR champion in government, like an actual person who is solely focused on coordinating multiple agencies and organizations that's responsible for promoting the city. What do you think about that idea?
I love it. I think that one of the reasons I want to do this is that we need someone with stature, with integrity, with a public voice that's going to be singing Baltimore's praises, talking about our many strengths and advantages. Mayoral candidates will point to every problem that the city has and how they're going to fix it. But I think we need someone at the top who's going to be a huge champion for Baltimore. When I came to Baltimore in the 1980s, Donald Schaefer was the mayor, and I think he played that role. He was a very positive voice for the city. I think he got people excited about Baltimore, made people feel like this was a city on the move. You wanted to be here. You wanted to be part of this. And I think we've had a negative narrative for way too long. It's time to stop that and start talking much more positively about the city and what the opportunities are here. We have amazing institutions in Baltimore, medical, educational. Let me not forget the people of Baltimore. We have tremendous assets here. We have a great location, and we're not a super expensive city to locate in. We should be a great city for businesses, millennials, people who are looking to locate. They should come here. But we need a mayor who's going to tell that story and partner with, the philanthropic institutions, with charitable institutions, with all of the levels of government, the counties, the state, the federal government, to really make this a place for good investment.
And one question I asked Brandon Scott when we had him on, and I want to ask you because of your knowledge of just other policies, and you sound a little bit wonky, is, are there other mayors across the country that you see doing really interesting things or implementing good ideas that you might want to take and borrow and bring to Baltimore?
Sure, I'll talk about some of the cities that I pay attention to. First of all, I spent a lot of time in Detroit when they filed for bankruptcy. I was working in the Obama administration at the time, and so we were trying to help them get back on their feet and see how, for example, they could use federal aid to help them. I am so impressed with the progress that city has made over the past 5 years. And they've done that under Mayor Dugan, who I think has really built a great agenda working with the private sector and the public sector to advance that city. The sort of strides they've made on things like vacant housing, on things like the digital divide, and things like investment in infrastructure. We should be doing those sort of things in Baltimore. I also pay attention to Oakland, California, which has many similar characteristics to Baltimore and has done a good job of developing community-based institutions, financial institutions, to help small businesses and help growth in that city. I like the environmental program that the city of Los Angeles has adopted to really improve air quality, to work on sustainable jobs, to work on waste reduction. We should have a economic development program in Baltimore that is embracing environmental goals at the same time, so that we could really be moving the needle here in Baltimore to improve some of our very poor statistics on air quality, for example. At the same time, we're creating jobs in environmental and green industries.
So I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to our show before, but at the end of our interviews, we like to ask some fun questions that allow our listeners to get to know a bit more about you personally.
Okay.
And so the first question is, what's the last book, movie, and music recommendation you made to a friend or family member? You've got to hit all three: book, movie, music.
Book, movie, music. I'd have to talk about at least 2 books. I'm always reading 3 or 4 things at the same time, usually something lighter, something heavier, something
Oh, you like
related.
Tom.
Pardon?
I said you're like Tom.
Just for fun, for the campaign, I read a book called Charlotte Walsh Likes to Win. And it's about a businesswoman who runs for the Senate in the state of Pennsylvania. It's highly entertaining. It's a real page turner. That's light. Right now, I'm reading a book by Eric Larson, and it's about Winston Churchill's first year in office in World War II and his challenges of coming into a new role. It's called The Splendid and the Vile. I'm about halfway through it, really like it. I think it's a good read, just came out this year. There are other books on my nightstand, but those are 2 that come to mind. Let's see, movies. Wow. I haven't been to a lot of movies this spring. I've been hard on the campaign trail.
None of us have.
I think, well, maybe I'll do 2. The first is kind of, this is my husband's idea. He wanted me to go watch Ford versus Ferrari, and I had almost no interest in seeing this movie about car racing. I actually liked it, so I could recommend that. I thought it was a good movie. And then I also watched Just Mercy, which is a story of Brian Stevenson and his work defending prisoners on death row in Alabama. It is an amazing, it's a movie. There's also actually a documentary that came out about Brian Stevenson, where he, of course, is himself in the documentary. I'd recommend watching both of them. I thought they were just very, very good. And they're very much of the moment, and I think people in America need to see Just Mercy.
How about music?
Now, that's one where I'm going to disappoint you. I am pretty dull on that front. I grew up in I guess I came of age in like the 1980s, and so my go-to places are things like Jackson Browne or Bruce Springsteen or Neil Young or
That works.
Folk music, Judy Collins. I like Jack Johnson. I won't have anything really exciting and in the moment for you. I go back to my tried and tested.
That actually works. I think that will resonate with some of our listeners.
All right. So this is the one that if you haven't listened to our podcast before, you might get stumped by this, but what is the most unpopular, benign opinion that you hold? So it's got to be unpopular, which isn't a candidate's favorite thing to bring up, but also benign. So no one's going to get real angry about it.
I'm not sure this is benign, but I would say I will go to the mat. I'll go to my grave defending print journalism. I worry a lot about people who read filtered news and are just getting what they want to hear. I am a news junkie. I actually get 5 print newspapers at home.
Wow.
And I don't get through all of them every day, but I want to read, different perspectives, conservative, liberal, business-oriented, non-business oriented. And the reason it's so important is when I read the newspaper, I end up reading things I wasn't looking for, learning something unexpected. And I worry a lot about I'm just going to do online news. I'll put on my filters. I'll just read what I want to read. We're missing something. And so I'm a huge advocate for that. And I know younger people, my kids would say, oh, you can get all that stuff online. The problem is you're not just going to find it online. I think you need to be presented with it. So I'm a early morning riser. I like my cup of coffee. I like my newspapers, and I'll continue to read widely because I think we need every perspective.
Now I need to know which 5. What 5 newspapers?
Sure. So locally, I get the Baltimore Sun and Baltimore Business Journal. I get the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Financial Times, which is a London-based paper, which gives me more of a global perspective on things. I actually think that the FT, Financial Times, does a good job of putting policy and finance together. You might not expect that from the title, but it's a good read. So those are the three. And then I won't even get into all the magazines that enter my house. I will say our recycling bin is very large.
What, if any, podcasts are you listening to?
Locally, the ones that I follow, there's one called Charm City Dreamers, which I like. It really focuses on the people and just across such a wide spectrum of people that are doing amazing things in Baltimore. I like Joe Melchinsky's Shift Happens. I have to say that carefully. Shift Happens. He runs an organization called Shift the Work, which is a very thoughtful, deep look at, big changes going on in society and how people and work are engaging, how things are changing. I really recommend that one. So those are the two that I probably follow locally. Yeah.
What, and this has to be something that someone can go out and buy, or right now get carry out, delivered, whatever it is. What is the best meal in Baltimore City?
I like to go to places that I can walk to or that are nearby, and I like to support small businesses. That's a big part of my work in Baltimore. Best breakfast, I'd say I'd recommend a place in Waverly called Capera's Kitchen. Can't beat that place for a good breakfast. Just because this was my lunch today, I would say a corned beef sandwich from Pete's Grill is pretty good too. There's a restaurant nearby that's called Cipriana. They started out as a food truck downtown. I used to get my lunch sandwiches there when I worked downtown. They're on 39th Street now. Those are three things that come to mind. The food's good at all these places.
Good.
So I just did breakfast, lunch, and dinner for you. You can have a whole day and walk to every one of them. But the point is that every neighborhood in Baltimore should have walkable restaurants and places where you can get something you like that's, a good meal.
All right. What activity or hobby have you rediscovered during this quarantine?
Actually, I'm outdoors whenever I can be. I get cooped up in the house, so I've been bicycling more. Yesterday was beautiful. It got up into the 80s, and I like to bicycle in Druid Hill Park. It's not far from where I live, and that's a nice, hilly, good course. So I would say I've gotten back into bicycling. I haven't had a lot of time other than a little bit of daily exercise. I'm also a runner. I do that. Other than that, I've been pretty focused on this campaign.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
Probably falls into a basket of never judging people. I always say, I don't judge a book by its cover. I want to open the book. I want to read it. I want to listen. I want to talk. I think you can never go wrong listening to people. Don't form your opinions or make your judgments before you know. So I think that's probably the best advice I've gotten in many forms over the years.
And the last question that we end with, that we'd love to ask all of our listeners, because it just gives us so much rich information and a really, really good, solid answer. What do you think we need to do to elevate Maryland?
From where I sit, I want to restore Baltimore as the flagship city for Maryland, as the economic engine for the state, as the mecca for visitors. It's all here. I came to this city in the early 1980s. Harbor Place had just opened. Camden Yards was coming. The National Aquarium opened, the National Science Center. I mean, the harbor was just so enticing. But now I think we have a bigger opportunity to reach out across the city and bring back some very disinvested parts of Baltimore and make this city the showcase that it can be. And I think for Baltimore, we also have a really big opportunity here to restore opportunity to people who've been left behind. If we can say that we raised up everyone in Baltimore and we all benefited, that will be a great accomplishment. We could be a signature city for that. There's a great section today in the New York Times called The Cities We Need. I read it cover to cover. That's what Baltimore can be. And I think with the right leadership, with the right agenda, and with the right force behind it, I think we can make Baltimore something that Maryland will just be so proud of.
I like it. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show. And you only have, I guess, a few more weeks left in the primary. And then also, I would say, since we're having Wes Moore on Tuesday, I hope you'll listen to him, because he certainly has some important things to say about Baltimore City as well. But
I always listen to him. I know him, and I think he is a great champion for Baltimore as well. I was going to mention that Celia Munoz and I both served at the same time in the Obama administration. I'll be listening to that one. But you know, you're getting great voices on your program, and I think we all care so much about, you know, our city and our country and our state, that it's really great that you're giving people the chance to talk about these things.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that, and thank you for coming on.
Sure, sure.